She had prayed for a child for as long as she could remember. Not the casual, hopeful kind of prayer that most people offer when they want something badly. The specific, daily, bone-deep kind that becomes part of the rhythm of a person's life, threaded through the morning and the evening and all the quiet hours in between. She had prayed in churches and in parking lots and in hospital waiting rooms. She had prayed with her hands folded and her eyes closed and her whole heart open in the way that a person prays when they are genuinely convinced that the answer is coming, that it is only a matter of time, that God or the universe or whatever force governs the arrival of the things we want most desperately is listening and will eventually say yes. Her name was Melissa Greer. She lived in Houston, Texas. She was 33 years old, and in the fall of 2019, she decided that she was done waiting for an answer. She was going to take matters into her own hands. What she did next would shock an entire nation. It would end the life of a 29-year-old mother who had done nothing wrong. It would leave a newborn baby girl without her mother in the first weeks of her life. And it would send Melissa Greer to prison for 55 years, where she will remain until she is 88 years old, if she lives that long. But before we get to any of that, there is something you need to understand. This story begins not with darkness, but with longing. With a woman who wanted something so profoundly, so completely, that the wanting eventually consumed everything else in her, including her conscience, including her love for someone she had called her best friend for more than a decade. Stay with me through this entire story, because the ending is not what you think it is, and the person at the center of it is not who you think she is. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you have not yet subscribed to Story Nest, please do it now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story is only the beginning. Before we go back to Houston and Austin and the friendship that began at a church camp in the Texas Hill Country when both of these women were 11 years old and ended in an apartment on a December morning 22 years later, there are questions that need to be named. The first, how does a woman convince everyone around her that she is pregnant for months, convincingly enough that the people who see her regularly never once doubt it? Shane Carey, Heather Warren's fiancé, told investigators that Melissa was visibly pregnant. He said she would hold her hands under her belly to support the weight. He had seen that before with women who were actually pregnant. He believed her completely. He had been his fiancé's closest friend for more than a decade. Why would he not? The second question is harder and harder to sit with. How does a woman who has been your friend since you were 11 years old, who helped you pick out baby shower invitations, who went to bridal shows with you, who was there in the room when your child was born, become the person who walks through the door of your home with a key you gave her in trust and love and leaves you dead in a black duffel bag in the trunk of her car? What is the internal distance between those two things? And the third question, the one that never fully resolves, is about a baby girl named Lily, about a father named Daniel, about a 6-year-old boy who dropped his lunchbox in the kitchen that December evening and asked his father where his mama was. These are the questions. The answers will take us across 2 Texas cities, through 8 days that gripped an entire nation, and into a Travis County courtroom where a judge delivered a sentence and said words that the people present have not forgotten. Let's go back to where this story begins. Let's go back to who Heather Warren was, because she deserves to be known before she is mourned. Heather Warren was born in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in 1990, and she grew up there in the particular warmth of a Gulf Coast town where the summers are long and the community is close and the church is as much a social structure as it is a spiritual one. She was the kind of child that teachers remember, not because she was the most academically accomplished in the room, but because she brought an atmosphere with her. Her high school Spanish teacher would say years later, standing at a candlelight vigil on the Lake Charles waterfront on a December evening that no one present would ever forget, that Heather had always shown up to class with a smile on her face and an eagerness that made the room feel different when she was in it. This is the kind of memory that accumulates around people like Heather, small and specific and warm, the kind that makes a crowd of people standing in the December cold feel not just grief, but the specific grief of knowing exactly what they are missing. She loved animals. This detail appears again and again in accounts of the people who knew her, mentioned not as a footnote, but as a defining characteristic. She was studying to become a veterinary technician in the period before her death, building toward a career that would allow her to put her care for animals into professional form. Her obituary said she loved animals and was known for her adventurous and giving spirit, and that her spirit brightened every room she entered. Her friend Carrie Laughlin said at the vigil, "She was infectious. She was a free spirit. She didn't want to be put in a cage. She was fun. We laughed a lot. She would have done anything for anybody. She would have done anything for anybody." This is the sentence that runs through every account of who Heather was. She would have done anything for anybody. She had done things for Melissa. She had been her bestie, her oldest friend, her person. She had given her a key to her home. She would have done anything for anybody. And it cost her everything. She had moved to Austin in her early 20s and built a life there with the same fullness she brought to every context. She had a son, a boy she had been raising with fierce and tender love since he was born, who was 6 years old in the fall of 2019 and attended Cowan Elementary School in South Austin. She had a fiancé named Daniel, a carpenter who had fallen in love with her in the complete and irreversible way, who would stand outside a courthouse 3 years later and say with the measured dignity of enormous grief that she was a wonderful mother and an extraordinary woman, and that she deserved more than this. By the spring of 2019, Heather was pregnant with their daughter, greeting the pregnancy with the particular joy of a woman who had always known she wanted this and was now living it. She was in good health. She was happy. She wanted children. She wanted a family. She wanted the life she was building. And she was 3 weeks into having it when Melissa Greer drove from Houston to South Austin on a December morning and let herself in with a key. Heather and Melissa Greer had known each other since they were 11 years old, meeting at a faith-based summer camp in the Texas Hill Country. They grew up in different towns but kept the closeness through the accumulating events of their 20s, through moves and relationships and jobs, and the particular kind of bond that forms between people who have known each other since childhood and watched each other become adults. A friend who knew both of them told reporters in December 2019 that Heather had called Melissa her bestie, and that the description was not casual. It was accurate. They were genuine best friends in every sense of the word. When Heather was pregnant with her son in 2013, Melissa helped her pick out baby shower invitations. Facebook posts showed them attending the Houston bridal show together, eating at Longhorn Steakhouse, doing the ordinary things that close friends do in the same chapter of life. Melissa was present for the significant moments of Heather's life, not as a guest at milestones, but as a presence in the daily texture. She drove from Houston to Austin for Heather's prenatal appointments in the fall of 2019. She was one of the first people told when Heather's water broke. She was in the delivery room when Lily Carey was born on November 26th. Daniel noted afterward that she had been eager to hold the baby in a way that surprised him slightly at the time. He filed it as an oddness and put it aside because the day was not a day for dwelling on anything other than the arrival of his daughter. The key to the apartment was given to Melissa during her visit in the days following Lily's birth. It was the kind of gift that long friendships give without ceremony, a practical expression of trust. Heather gave it and thought nothing more. She did not think about what it meant to give someone access to the place where her children slept. She did not think about it because Melissa was her bestie. The key was the natural continuation of everything that had preceded it. And Melissa took it, and she did not return it. Melissa Greer had grown up in the same faith world as Heather, had met her in the same church context at 11 years old, and had carried through her adult life many of the same values and commitments that the people who knew both of them associated with both of them. She was, by the accounts of people who knew her in the years before December 2019, a warm and engaged person, active in her faith community, someone whose manner did not raise alarms in the people around her. A defense attorney who had represented her in an earlier legal matter told reporters in December 2019 that she had appeared to be a normal, functioning person who showed no indicators of the kind of psychological distress that might lead someone toward violence. She had appeared, in his professional experience of her, to be entirely herself. She was living in Houston by 2019 in a home she shared with a man named Christopher. He believed, by the fall of 2019, that he was going to be a father. Melissa had told him she was pregnant. The precise circumstances of her actual fertility situation were never fully established in the public record of the case. But what was established was that investigators found discrepancies in her account of giving birth, and that Christopher later told law enforcement he had never seen her bare stomach during the pregnancy, because their relationship did not lend itself to seeing her in stages of undress. He had believed her anyway. He had believed her because she was the woman he was living with, the woman who cooked in the kitchen of their shared home, the woman who had told him they were starting a family together. There was no reason not to believe her. There was no available mechanism for doubt. Baby registries connected to Melissa's name appeared online, indicating a due date of December 1st. An attorney who had known her professionally said she appeared to be doing what he called the pregnant waddle. Nobody had any reason to think otherwise, because Melissa had not given anyone a reason. She had done the opposite. She had given everyone reasons to believe, had constructed those reasons carefully over months, and had tended them as you tend something that must not be allowed to fail. The internet searches tell part of the story of what was happening inside Melissa during this period. Over the month of November and into December of 2019, a device linked to Melissa's account conducted searches of some variation of Heather Warren's name at least 162 times. 162. Over a month. That is an average of more than 5 searches per day. It is the search behavior of someone who is not simply curious, but focused, monitoring, attentive to every piece of information that surfaces about a specific person. In the same period, she deactivated her Facebook account on December 11th, the day before Heather disappeared. On December 12th itself, she searched for the reasons for an Amber Alert and for the phrase Amber Alert issued Austin. 2 days later, she searched for bodies found in Austin, Texas. This is the digital record of someone who knew what was coming and then monitored what followed. It is the record of a plan being executed and tracked. It is the most complete possible record of a person who had already made her decision and was managing its consequences. The mechanics of faking a pregnancy for months require consistency that most people would find impossible to sustain. You must account for the physical changes everyone around you expects to see. You must maintain the emotional register of a pregnant woman without the hormonal reality of a pregnancy to sustain it. And you must do all of this while carrying, somewhere in the private interior of your life, the knowledge of what you have decided to do when the performance reaches its natural conclusion. Melissa Greer did all of this for months, in front of people who were paying attention and who cared about her, and who, after December 2019, said uniformly that they had had no idea, that she had seemed entirely real, that she had seemed like herself. She attended Heather's prenatal appointments as a companion and support person, sitting in obstetric clinic waiting rooms, presenting herself as a fellow expectant mother. She talked about due dates with Heather. They had spoken about the possibility of giving birth on the same day, a possibility that Heather had loved, that had resonated with her sense of the friendship as something that would extend into the next generation and bind their children together the way it had bound them. She had not known that the idea was not a shared fantasy. It was a piece of the planning. On the morning of December 12th, 2019, at approximately 7:30 in the morning, Heather Warren dropped her 6-year-old son off at Cowan Elementary School in South Austin. The school security camera captured her doing it. She is visible in the footage, walking her boy to the entrance, bending down to say something to him, straightening up, watching him go through the door. She was carrying Lily in an infant carrier. She was 3 weeks postpartum, tired in the ordinary way of a new mother, but present and herself and visibly fine, simply living through the ordinary demands of a good and full life. The footage is the last documentation of Heather Warren alive. She walked her son to school at 7:30 in the morning, and nothing in the footage suggests anything other than an ordinary December Thursday. It is the most devastating kind of footage, the kind where nothing has happened yet. Investigators believe Heather drove back to the apartment after dropping her son at school. T-Mobile cell phone records confirmed to investigators that Melissa's phone was in the South Austin area near Heather's apartment complex that same morning, and then moved steadily south and east toward Houston over the course of the day, arriving in the Houston area in the late afternoon. A resident of the apartment complex gave a statement that she had seen a woman matching Melissa Greer's description at the complex that morning, carrying a small infant and getting into the back of a vehicle that then left quickly. The woman had not looked at her. She had not thought much about it at the time. It would come back to her when the police knocked on her door. It would come back with the particular clarity of a memory that was not understood when it was made and is only now, in the context of what has followed, legible. She said it kept her awake for months. According to Austin police and the arrest affidavit filed in the case, Melissa Greer came through the door of Heather's South Austin apartment that morning using the key she had been given 16 days earlier. What happened inside is reconstructed through the medical examiner's findings and the physical evidence gathered during the investigation. Heather was strangled. The medical examiner determined she died from ligature strangulation. The determination was homicide. She was 29 years old. Her son was at school. Her daughter was 3 weeks old. Daniel was at work. The apartment was quiet. Melissa placed Heather's body in a black duffel bag. She placed Lily Carey in an infant carrier. She loaded both of them in her vehicle and drove away. The drive from South Austin to Houston covers 245 miles of Texas interstate, approximately 4 hours. She drove through the December afternoon with Lily in the back seat and Heather in the trunk, through the flat Texas landscape, through the moment when the highway widens approaching Houston and the suburban sprawl begins to resolve into specific streets and exits and neighborhoods. She arrived at the home on Bojack Drive in Jersey Village in the late afternoon or early evening. She carried Lily inside. Christopher was home. She told him she had given birth, not at a hospital, but privately at a wellness center, because she had wanted the experience to be quiet and personal. She said the baby was a girl. Christopher looked at the baby and felt something he had been anticipating for months. He believed it. He held the baby. He was, in that moment, a man who believed he was a father. What Christopher did not know, could not have known, would not know for 8 more days, was that the baby in his arms was Lily Carey. That Lily's mother was in the trunk of the car parked outside the house. He held Lily Carey on the evening of December 12th, and he thought she was his. That thought shaped the entire next 8 days of his life. He fed her. He held her. He stayed up with her in the night. He went to Target on the day FBI agents approached him and bought formula because they were running low. He was a man caring for a baby. He was in every way available to him, exactly what he believed himself to be. Daniel came home from work on December 12th to find Heather and Lily missing. Heather's car was in the lot. Her purse was in the car. Her phone was in the car. The apartment contained nothing visibly wrong, just the absence of Heather and the absence of Lily and the diaper bag that Heather took everywhere since Lily was born, and that was not there. He called Heather's phone. It rang in the car, and no one answered. He called her mother in Louisiana. He called her friends. Each person told him the same thing. They had not heard from her since that morning. He filed a missing persons report at 7:30 that evening, 12 hours after Heather had dropped their son at school. He mentioned Melissa Greer had been expected to visit that day. He mentioned it the way he mentioned everything else, as a fact that might be relevant. He was simply trying to help find his family. On December 13th, he said to reporters, "I don't know why anybody would ever harm or touch these 2 beautiful women together." He kept the door open to every version of events that did not end with the worst one. He was a man who loved someone and was not yet prepared to stop hoping. By the second day of Heather's disappearance, her face was on local television. By the third day, it was on national broadcasts. The case had the elements that drive media attention in missing persons cases: a young mother, a newborn, a disappearance with no obvious explanation, a community of people who loved them and were willing to appear on camera to say so. But beyond the mechanics of news coverage, there was something about this case that reached people who had no personal connection to the story. The combination of a mother and a 3-week-old infant, the age of the baby, 3 weeks, the fact that this baby had just arrived, had barely had time to enter the world before both she and her mother were gone. This reached something that was not about the news cycle, but about the most fundamental human instinct around the protection of newborns and their mothers. Texas EquiSearch dispatched a team to Austin. The organization's founder, Tim Miller, arrived personally. He later told journalists that when he received the list of Heather's close contacts, Melissa Greer was the first name he reached out to. He dialed her number. She answered. She said she was going to keep talking to people and asked if it was okay to call him back if she found out anything. He said yes. He said later he had had no particular suspicion of her. She had sounded like a worried friend. She had sounded exactly like what she presented herself as. The performance was that good. Friends of Melissa's told reporters they had been speaking to her every day during the search, that she had seemed distressed and engaged in the way of someone who desperately wanted Heather and the baby to be found. She had been texting updates. She had been sharing the social media posts with Heather's photograph. One friend said, when the arrest was announced, "I talked to Megan every day." She said it with the disorientation of someone whose reality has just been replaced by a version that makes no sense. The FBI joined the investigation on December 17th. The Behavioral Analysis Unit provided an assessment identifying the case as consistent with a documented category of crime they called fetal abduction by a woman who had faked a pregnancy. The assessment noted that in the overwhelming majority of these cases, the perpetrator was known personally to the victim, had cultivated the relationship in the period leading up to the crime, and had obtained physical access to the infant through that relationship. The assessment pointed toward someone in Heather's close inner circle, someone who had been there for the birth, someone who had claimed to be pregnant at the same time. The cell phone records were being processed. The surveillance footage was being reviewed. A tip received on December 19th led investigators to the Houston area. They directed surveillance to the house on Bojack Drive. They observed the property. Then they followed Christopher when he left to drive to a Target store in the Houston suburbs. An agent approached him in the parking lot and showed him a flyer. The flyer had 2 photographs on it: Heather Warren, Lily Carey. Christopher looked at the photographs and said, "That's the baby in my house." He said it simply, with the directness of someone who has no reason to be anything other than direct. And the investigation moved immediately to Bojack Drive. Law enforcement surrounded the house on Bojack Drive in Jersey Village, Harris County, Texas, on the evening of December 20th, 2019. 8 days. 8 days since Daniel had come home to an empty apartment. 8 days since Lily had been taken from South Austin. 8 days in which the entire country had been searching and hoping and watching, and a man named Daniel had been doing media interviews with the voice of someone who was not yet prepared to stop believing that the people he loved would come home. 8 days. And then investigators were at the door on Bojack Drive, and the search was over, in the most terrible way that searches can end. Melissa Greer's car was parked in front of the house. In the trunk, investigators found Heather Warren. She had been there for 8 days. The Harris County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed she had died from ligature strangulation and recorded her place of death as the trunk of a vehicle. She was 29 years old. Inside the house, in a bouncy chair in the living room, was Lily Carey. She was 3 weeks and 6 days old. She was unharmed. She had been fed. She was entirely herself in the way of an infant who knows only warmth and hunger and the arms that have been holding her. She was alive. She was alive, and she was in a bouncy chair in the living room, and her mother was in the trunk of the car outside, and the 2 facts existed in the same house at the same moment, and neither made the other easier to hold. Melissa was taken into custody that evening. When an officer asked about her whereabouts on the day Heather disappeared, she told him she had been at the beach with a cousin. Later in the same conversation, she told the same officer that she had given birth that day. She could not, when pressed, provide the name or location of the wellness center where she said the delivery had occurred. The 2 accounts sat side by side in the transcript, each incompatible with the other, and both incompatible with the world she had been maintaining for 8 days. Lily Carey was returned to Daniel on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. She was placed in his arms in a hospital corridor in Austin, and she settled there with the complete trust of an infant who knows nothing about what has happened and needs only the warmth of being held. A photograph taken of this moment, which the family later released, shows Daniel holding Lily in that corridor. It is not dramatic. It is simply a man holding his daughter in a moment that almost did not exist, that came within 8 days of never being possible. It is the image that stays. On the Monday evening after Lily was found, Austin held a prayer vigil for Heather at Garrison Park. People came in the December cold with candles. They came from the church she attended, from the neighborhoods she had lived in, from the broader Austin community that had watched the search for 8 days. Katrina Collicott, a friend who had known both Heather and Melissa, stood at the vigil and said, "You call someone a friend for so long, then this happens. It's disgusting." She said it with the specific outrage of betrayal that runs deeper than ordinary grief, the outrage of someone who has had not just a person taken from them, but a friendship as well. The outrage of learning that the person who did this was someone who had been accepted and trusted and loved within the community that is now standing in the cold mourning what she did. Heather's body was released to her family for services in her hometown of Lake Charles, Louisiana. A public viewing was held at Johnson Funeral Home on December 27th, where the people of Lake Charles lined up to pay their respects to a woman they had known as a child, as a teenager, as the girl who always stopped to talk about their dog. The funeral was held the following afternoon, officiated by Heather's youth pastor who had known her since she was a young girl. Friends and family described her as a star in the middle of darkness and the perfect mother. Lily Carey was at the funeral. She was 1 month old. The sound of crying and fussing from Lily was heard above the prayers and the remembrances and the weeping of the people in the pews. Lily did not know where she was. She simply was present, alive, the child Heather had brought into the world 3 weeks and 2 days before she was killed. On the Saturday evening of the funeral day, Heather's high school classmates gathered on the Lake Charles waterfront for a candlelight vigil. They sang her favorite songs. One of them was Hallelujah. The other was Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus, which is the detail that makes this particular vigil feel most specifically and tenderly Heather, because it is not the song of a solemn occasion, but the song of a person who was fun and who liked what she liked, and who would not have wanted her friends to stand on a waterfront in December pretending to be more dignified than she was. They sang it in the December cold beside the water of her hometown. Rachel Powell, a lifelong friend, stood at the funeral and said, every fiber of her being was wrapped around her children. Every fiber. Every single fiber. That is who she was. That is the loudest thing about her. And it is louder than what was done to her, and it will remain louder. The grand jury returned its indictment on January 28, 2020. The charges were capital murder, kidnapping, and tampering with a human corpse. Capital murder in Texas carries the possibility of life without parole or, in certain circumstances, the death penalty, and the Travis County District Attorney's Office had made the decision to pursue the case at that level. Melissa Greer's bond was set at $1 million. She remained in the Travis County Correctional Complex. For Daniel Warren, who had buried Heather in January of 2020 and was now raising Lily and her older brother alone, the 3 years of waiting were a particular kind of endurance. He had to watch Lily grow from the newborn she had been when her mother was killed into a toddler, into a small child beginning to move through the world with her own personality and her own questions, while the woman who had killed her mother was still in the system, still years away from any resolution. Melissa's defense team filed motions challenging the search of the house on Bojack Drive, arguing that investigators had entered the home without a signed warrant more than 8 hours before the warrant was obtained. If the motion had succeeded, it would have removed Lily alive in the living room and Heather's body in the trunk from the evidentiary record entirely. Travis County District Court Judge Selena Alvarenga denied the motion in May of 2022, ruling that investigators had entered the home lawfully under the exigent circumstances exception given they were in active pursuit of a missing newborn. The ruling cleared the final major legal obstacle between the prosecution and trial. In January of 2023, with trial scheduled for March, Melissa Greer's attorneys contacted the Travis County District Attorney's Office to discuss a plea. The agreement reduced the charge from capital murder to first-degree murder in exchange for 55 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and a waiver of all appellate rights. The District Attorney's Office framed it as a way of providing closure to the families without requiring them to sit through the detailed forensic evidence of how Heather died. On February 2, 2023, more than 3 years after Heather Warren was strangled in her own apartment by the woman who had her key, Melissa Greer stood in Travis County Criminal District Court and entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder. The courtroom was full. Heather's family had come from Louisiana. They held a large photograph of Heather laughing, the full, unguarded, whole-face laugh that the people who knew her said was the most essentially Heather thing about her. They held it throughout the proceeding. Heather's mother Tammy stood and spoke to the court. She said, Heather's hugs were strong, full of love. They lingered in the atmosphere. I still feel them now. She loved beyond measure, and she never gave up on anyone. When I think of her, which is every moment, in everything I do, I ask, what would Heather say or think? It gives me comfort. Thinking of her gives me peace amidst the pain. Judge Selena Alvarenga sentenced Melissa Greer to 55 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Before delivering the sentence, she addressed Melissa directly from the bench. She said, "It is difficult, if not impossible, to find justice for a horrendous crime such as this one." She said, "No sentence can change the fact that you destroyed an entire family." She said, "You have deprived an innocent child, an innocent baby, of the opportunity to grow up with her mother beside her." Melissa was described by those present as tearful during the sentencing. The composure that had characterized her appearances through 3 years of legal proceedings gave way in that room. In front of the judge's words and Tammy's words, and the photograph of Heather laughing held by the people who had come from Louisiana. She was 37 years old on the day she was sentenced. She will be 92 when the sentence expires. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has documented the category of crime that this case represents. Almost all of the women in these documented cases experienced a profound and unaddressed grief around fertility or pregnancy loss that was never properly treated. Almost all of them had constructed a false pregnancy that created a social commitment they felt unable to withdraw from, a narrative that narrowed their perceived options until the only exit they could see was one that required harm to someone else. And almost all of them had maintained close, genuine friendships with their eventual victims, not as strategic positioning, but as genuine emotional connections that were ultimately overwhelmed by a compulsion they had never sought help for. The crime, in almost every documented case, was not the beginning of the internal story. It was the end of one that had been building in silence for a much longer time. This is not offered as an excuse. What Melissa Greer did is not excused by the suffering that preceded it. Heather Warren was 29 years old. She had a son who needed her and a daughter who would never know her and a fiancé who loved her and a mother who still feels her hugs. Nothing about the psychological context of Melissa's choices changes any of that. But there is something instructive in trying to understand the shape of what happened, because the shape contains information that is useful. The information is this: the longing that drove Melissa Greer to what she did was a longing she carried alone. She did not tell Christopher the truth. She did not tell Heather. She did not tell her pastor or a counselor or her mother. She carried it privately, and the privacy allowed it to grow past the point where the people around her could have helped her carry it differently. This is the thing that might have changed the story. Not a checklist of warning signs. Honesty. Her own, spoken to someone equipped to receive it. That honesty was never spoken, and a 29-year-old woman with her whole life ahead of her died for it. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has recorded cases of fetal abduction in the United States going back decades. In almost every case, the crime was preceded by a faked pregnancy that lasted for months. In almost every case, the perpetrator was known personally to the victim. In almost every case, the people who knew the perpetrator said, afterward, that they had not seen it coming, that she had seemed like herself. There were no red flags in the sense of specific, visible warning signs. The warning signs were entirely internal. They were invisible from the outside. The suffering that leads to it is carried in private, in the way of someone who has decided that the full truth of what they are experiencing is something they cannot share. And the only reliable intervention, in the cases where intervention has been possible, has been the creation of conditions in which people can tell the truth about the grief they are carrying and be met with care rather than judgment, and be helped to carry it differently before it grows past the point of no return. Lily Carey turned 4 years old in November of 2023. She is growing up in South Austin with her father Daniel and her older brother, in a home that Daniel has worked deliberately to fill with Heather's presence in every way available to him. Photographs on the walls. Stories told in the natural context of daily life, not as formal tributes, but as the ordinary texture of a household that has decided that Heather's absence will not be allowed to become the loudest thing in the room. He said at the sentencing, standing outside the courthouse with the quiet dignity of a man who has been holding something enormous for 3 years. She was a wonderful mother and an extraordinary woman, and she deserved more than this. Then he went home to his children. Daniel has said he thinks about the day he will tell Lily the full story often, rehearsing it, revising it, looking for the version that is honest without being more than she can carry at the age she will be when it happens. He said that the thing he most wants Lily to know about her mother is not the story of her death. It is the story of her life. The way she loved animals and would stop to talk to a neighbor about their dog. The way her laugh was complete and unguarded and filled the room. The way every fiber of her being was wrapped around her children. These are the things he is building into the walls of Lily's life, not as a monument to grief, but as an inheritance. Not who Lily lost, who Lily came from. Melissa Greer is serving her sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She has waived her right to appeal. The case is legally closed. She said nothing on the record in the courtroom on the day of her sentencing beyond the word guilty. She sat with tears visible in her face while Judge Alvarenga spoke, and while Tammy Broussard spoke, and while the photograph of Heather laughing was held by the people who had come from Louisiana to be present for that moment. What she carries inside the silence of her time in custody, whether it constitutes genuine reckoning or something else, is not observable from the outside. What the record does show is that she made a choice, in the fall of 2019, that she made again on December 12th, that she made in every decision that followed, and that each of those choices was hers to make and hers to answer for. She is answering for them. For 55 years, she is answering for them. Tammy Broussard said something in her courtroom statement that I want to leave you with, because it is the most distilled and precise version of the lesson this story carries. She said, "She loved beyond measure, and she never gave up on anyone." This was said about Heather, and it is true about Heather, and it is also, in its own painful way, a description of what made what happened to Heather possible. She loved without condition. She trusted without reservation. She gave a key to a woman who had been her friend since she was 11 years old, and she thought nothing of it, because Heather Warren did not think that way about people. She gave the way she gave, fully and without calculation, right up until the morning it cost her everything. The quality of her love was not a weakness. It was the purest thing about her, and it was used, in the end, as the mechanism of her death. The door to her apartment was opened with a key she had given freely, and nothing about that will ever not be devastating. I want to leave you with two questions. The first is the one that this story demands. Do you believe 55 years was the right sentence for what Melissa Greer did? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. The second question is the one I have been sitting with since I finished writing this story. It is there someone in your life right now who is carrying something alone that they have not found a way to say out loud? Who is showing up for your milestones and laughing at the right moments and performing their version of fine? And who is not fine? And who has not found a way to say so? Because the only thing that might have changed Melissa Greer's story was someone asking that question at the right moment and meaning it, and waiting for the real answer. Thank you for watching Story Nest. If this story has moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already, and hit the notification bell so you are there for our next story. I will see you in the next one.